Woodlawn House is a huge house. It's so big you have to stand back about a quarter mile to see the entire house in one viewing. It's set on 11,000 acres of land. It was the largest estate in County Galway. Can you imagine 11,000 acres of land? It was as big as half a county. No, it wasn't. It was pretty big. Owned by the Trench family. They had arrived in Ireland after the Williamite Wars. They had bought up a lot of land. They came from England, and by the middle of the 18th century, 1750 or thereabouts, they had bought a bunch of land from the Martin family who had been dispossessed after the Williamite Wars and the Cromwellian Wars. The Martins had been very wealthy, and in fact one of them still remained wealthy. Edward Martin, or Trigger Martin, owned all the land from Galway to Connemara, and his house at Ballynahinch Castle is still there today at the hotel nowadays. Gorgeous hotel. The Trench family, they took a whole bunch of smaller estates and decided they were going to be the new British Raj. They decided to build a house. They hired an architect. Imagine an architect in Ireland in 1750. Well, we had them. We had Hoban, who designed the Phoenix Park, the residence of Áras an Uachtaráin, the president's house, and he also designed the White House. Well, one of his acolytes designed an Italianate mansion that must be, I'd say, 9,000 square meters. It's an enormous house. They say there are over 400 windows in Woodlawn House alone, and I can believe it. When you look at it today, it's a shadow of its former self. It's in ruins. The roof has been fixed, but the inside is dilapidated, and I have to tell you, wickedly spooky. You go in there, it's dark, the light coming through the broken shutters and in through the shattered windows throws all these shapes, and you can well imagine there being a ghost or something in the corridors, and you hear the noise of the house as it creaks and groans at night and during the day, and you say to yourself, that could be a ghost. Well, you might be sure there are ghosts here, because the Trench family were a tough old crowd. They were, made their money fighting wars with the British Empire, and they came to Ireland. They decided they were going to be new model farmers, and in order to do so, to make their land more productive, they cleared the land of over half their tenants in the late 18th century. They threw people out on the side of the road, clearing the land and leaving huge resentment behind, and of course huge damage. The Trench family were not popular. They were lords in name alone. They certainly had no respect among the local tenantry. The average tenant farmer in Ireland in 1840 was living on less than 5 acres of land. On Trench's land, it was a bit different. What they had done was they had brought in cattle grazers to make the farm into a big ranch. You can just imagine thousands and thousands of head of cattle, and all the people who looked after those cattle and cows and calves and the milk and whatever it would be. So it was a model farm. And to that model farm in 1771 came a gentleman called Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, whom we now know as the father of the American Revolution. He was coming to Europe and to Britain particularly to go to negotiate with King George and figure out how the colonies could get on better, lower taxes, because there were huge taxes on tea and tobacco and rum, and they wanted to be self-determining. They wondered, was there a parallel in Ireland? He came down for a week-long stay at the wonderful heap called Woodlawn House. He stayed there and realised very quickly that the Trench family treated their tenant farmers no better than chattels. And what Benjamin Franklin took away from his week-long visit to Galway in 1771 was that the English cared little or nothing for their tenant farmers or for their colonies. And when he got back to America, he set about standing for election as the first elected representative for Pennsylvania. He signed the Declaration of Independence, and the rest is history, as they say. The Trench family were run out of town, basically. They came back in 1923, and the Irish government, the brand new Irish government, they tried to force the big estates to be broken up, and that 11,000 acres became farms for nearly 200 families eventually. Small working farms in the East Galway plains with mixed cattle and various other crops and so on. The big house only had 115 acres of land around it, and that 115 acres wasn't big enough to sustain a house that needed so much maintenance and staff and maids and servants and butlers and footmen and coachmen and all the rest. And the family went bankrupt, basically. They sold off the land. The last of the Trench family died in 1947. One more nephew bought the land, and he committed suicide by shooting himself to death in 1973. That was the end of the Trench family. The house has been a scene of hauntings and reported sightings. The Blair Witch Project were terrified to go into the place. It was so dismal and dark and scary and spooky. But you know, think about what happens when you have upstairs, downstairs. You have downstairs all the maids and the servants and whatever. Upstairs you have the lords and their friends who had their wicked way with the young women, got them pregnant, and when they were pregnant those babies were taken, given away as adoptees or worse, who knows. And those women, some of them were shunned, they were locked up in their rooms, they died there, abandoned by their families, weeping and wailing. And maybe that's the sound you hear when you go up those creaking, spooky steps of Woodlawn House. You're hearing the cries of those poor, devastated women.